We have chosen a basketball defensive slide for our movement analysis project. Phase 1, standing resting position to athletic stance. At the neck and C-spine, you will move from a resting position to a slight lordotic curve with forward head posture. Your concentric movers will be the sternocleidomastoid and the scalenes, and your eccentric, the levator scapulae. At the shoulder, you'll move into abduction to 45 degrees, with the concentric movers being the deltoid and the supraspinatus, and the eccentric being the latissimus dorsi and teres major. You'll also have scapular retraction, with the rhomboids being the concentric movers and the supraspinatus and infraspinatus as the eccentric. At the elbow, you will bend to 90 degrees, with the brachioradialis being the concentric mover and the triceps brachii eccentrically lengthening. The wrist will stay in neutral, with the fingers moving into abduction and extension. Your concentric mover will be the extensor group and the eccentric the flexor group. Your trunk will stay in neutral, with the erector spinae being the concentric group and the rectus abdominis being the eccentric. Your hip will move into 30 to 45 degrees of flexion, slight external rotation at 5 to 10 degrees, and abduction to 25 degrees. Your concentric will be the iliopsoas and glute medius, and the eccentric will be the erector spinae, gluteus maximus, and adductor group. At the knee, you will move into 45 degrees of knee flexion, with the concentric movers being the hamstring group, eccentric being the quadriceps group. The ankle and foot, you will move into 5 to 10 degrees of external rotation and 10 to 15 degrees of dorsiflexion. Your concentric mover will be the tibialis anterior, and the eccentric the soleus and the gastrocnemius. Phase 2, athletic stance to first half of slide. The neck and C-spine, you will maintain a slight lordotic curve with the forward head posture, with the sternocleidomastoid and the scalenes being the concentric mover and the levator scapulae as the eccentric. At the shoulder, you will maintain 45 degrees of abduction, with the deltoid and the supraspinatus as the concentric, and the latissimus dorsi, the eccentric. You will maintain scapular retraction, with the rhomboids being the concentric and the supraspinatus being the eccentric. Your elbow will maintain a 90-degree flexion angle, with the brachioradialis being the concentric mover and the triceps brachii being the eccentric. Your wrist will stay in neutral, with the fingers in abduction and extension. Your concentric mover will be the extensor group and the eccentric the flexor group. Your trunk will stay in neutral, with the erector spinae being the concentric and the rectus abdominis being the eccentric. Your hip will unilaterally adduct to neutral, having a feet together posture while maintaining flexion. Your concentric will be the adductor group, gracilis, and iliopsoas, with the eccentric being the gluteus medius. Your knee will maintain 45 degrees of flexion, with the concentric movers being the hamstring group, the eccentric the quadriceps group. Your ankle and foot will maintain 5 to 10 degrees of external rotation and 10 to 15 degrees of dorsiflexion. The tibialis anterior will be the concentric, and the soleus and gastrocnemius will be the eccentric. Phase 3, complete the slide back to athletic position. At the neck and spine, you will maintain the lordotic curve with the forward head posture. Your sternocleidomastoid and the scalenes will be the concentric, and the levator scapulae the eccentric. Your shoulder will maintain abduction at 45 degrees, with the deltoid and supraspinatus being the concentric and latissimus dorsi being the eccentric. You will maintain scapular retraction, with the rhomboids being the concentric and the supraspinatus being the eccentric. Your elbow will maintain 90 degrees of flexion, with the brachioradialis being concentric and the triceps brachii being eccentric. Your wrist will maintain neutral, and your fingers will stay in abduction and extension. Your extensor group will be the concentric movers, and the flexor group the eccentric. Your trunk will stay in neutral, with the erector spinae being the concentric and the rectus abdominis being eccentric. Your hip will maintain flexion at 30 to 45 degrees, return to slight external rotation at 5 to 10 degrees, and you will abduct the opposite hip to 25 degrees. The iliopsoas and gluteus medius will be the concentric movers, and the erector spinae, gluteus maximus, and adductor group will be the eccentric. Your knee will maintain 45 degrees of flexion, with the hamstring group being the concentric and the quadriceps group being the eccentric. Your ankle and foot will maintain external rotation at 5 to 10 degrees and 10 to 15 degrees of dorsiflexion. Your tibialis anterior will be the concentric, and the soleus and gastrocnemius will be the eccentric. Phase 4, return to resting. Your neck and C-spine will bring back from a hyperlordotic curve to a normal neck posture, with the C-spine erector spinae group as the concentric and the sternocleidomastoid and scalenes as the eccentric. Your shoulders will return to resting position, arms at your side, with the teres minor and infraspinatus being the concentric movers and the eccentric the deltoid. Your elbow will fully extend, with the concentric being the triceps brachii and the eccentric the brachioradialis. Your wrist and hand will stay in neutral, with the fingers returning to adducted resting position. Your concentric movers will be the palmar interossi and the eccentric the dorsal interossi. Your trunk will stay in neutral, with the concentric movers being the erector spinae group and the eccentric the rectus abdominis. Your hip will return to extension, resting, rotation, and adduction. Concentric movers will be the gluteus maximus, adductor group, and gracilis, with the eccentric being the iliopsoas and gluteus medius. Your knee will return to full extension, with the concentric being the quadriceps group and the eccentric the hamstring group. Your ankle and foot will return to normal rotation and neutral flexion. Concentric group will be the gastrocnemius and tibialis posterior, the eccentric the tibialis anterior. Thank you for coming to our TED Talk.